Property ownership then versus now, rising demand, stagnant supply, and the crisis of affordability in Ontario.
Over the past 3 decades, Ontario's housing market has shifted from being broadly attainable to largely unaffordable. Home prices have soared while wages have risen far more slowly, creating an affordability crisis. This issue demands urgent, data-driven solutions that address both supply and affordability.
The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation defines affordable housing as costing no more than 30% of gross income. In Ontario, average home prices rose from about $200,000 in 1993 to $1 million in 2023, while median income grew from roughly 30,000 to 55,000. This widening gap, worsened by housing supply lagging behind population growth, persists despite government promises to build 500,000 homes annually.
Our position is clear. Ontario must significantly increase funding for affordable and social housing, enforce construction targets through transparent reporting, and reform rent control and zoning laws to better protect long-term affordability. Our target stakeholder is well flagged, Ontario's Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Our purpose is to influence policy decisions by presenting clear evidence of our affordability trends, highlighting gaps in funding and construction, and recommending urgent, data-backed policy changes.
Since 1993, Ontario home prices have risen nearly sixfold, while household incomes have grown less than twofold. Population growth has outpaced new housing construction, widening the supply gap, while reduced government funding has weakened affordable housing support, leaving many struggling with rising costs.
For our analysis, we gathered data from 1993 to 2023 from several reputable sources, choosing this time period to ensure accuracy and consistency across data sets. Population data came from Statistics Canada's population estimates table, where we took the median for each year. Median income also came from Statistics Canada, using the income of individual table with the yearly median selected. Housing supply and house prices came from CMHC's Housing Market Information Portal. We merged the yearly provincial files and filtered for Ontario only. Federal funding was taken from the Government of Canada's open data portal. We focused on the social housing agreement amounts as they consistently reflect federal housing investment in Ontario. The data set starts in 2000. The Consumer Price Index was taken from the Bank of Canada. The original data set was monthly, so we averaged the values for each year. CPI data starts in 1995. This gave us a consistent set of annual data to compare long-term trends in housing, income, funding, and population. We use Python to collect, clean, and visualize data, combining multiple data sets, filtering for relevant years and regions, and standardizing formats. This allowed us to plot trends like house prices versus income, housing supply versus population growth, CPI over time, and federal housing funding. We also built a reusable function to apply the same code to different datasets using libraries like Pandas for data handling, Matplotlib for plotting, and Glob for managing multiple files.
Income versus house price. This chart shows the widening gap between household incomes and home prices. While incomes have grown gradually over the last 30 years, home prices have risen at a far steeper rate, particularly since the mid-2000s. This trend highlights the growing difficulty for average Ontarians to afford home ownership. Housing supply versus population growth. From 1993 to 2023, Ontario's population grew steadily due to natural growth and immigration, but new housing construction lagged behind. This gap has fueled the housing shortage, increased competition, and driven prices upward. Federal investment in Ontario's housing sector has declined over the past 2 decades, slowing construction, limiting affordable housing, and widening the supply-demand gap. The issue peaked when Ontario nearly lost its federal housing funds, showing the risk of relying on shrinking federal support. Inflation impact. This graph shows the steady rise in inflation over time, with a sharp increase in recent years. Higher inflation pushes up construction costs and interest rates, making it more expensive to build homes and harder for buyers and renters to afford them. While inflation is a normal economic force, its recent spike has added significant pressure to an already strained housing market.
Results. Looking across these four trends, we can see how Ontario's housing crisis has intensified. First, housing prices have risen exponentially compared to incomes, creating a widening affordability gap. Second, population growth has consistently outpaced housing supply, driving competition for limited homes. Third, federal housing funding has steadily declined, and recent budget negotiations have even put Ontario at risk of losing key funding altogether. Finally, inflation has surged in recent years, Normally, inflation alone would create gradual cost increases, but the extreme and exponential rise in housing prices far outpaces inflation, showing this crisis isn't just market forces. It's the result of insufficient policies, lack of funding, and persistent supply shortages, all magnified by inflation's added pressure. Conclusion: delaying action will deepen the generational wealth gap. We recommend immediate investment in affordable housing, reforms to rent control, and enforcement of housing targets. These measures are essential to closing the supply-demand gap and restoring affordability. In conclusion, Ontario's housing crisis is the result of decades of rising demand, stagnant supply, and insufficient policy action. Our data-driven analysis makes clear that bold, immediate steps are needed to ensure housing remains accessible for all Ontarians. Thanks for listening to our presentation.